Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Monty if you're new here, and today I am going to be doing my first true reading wrap up of the year. This isn't going to be over a specified amount of time. This isn't a monthly wrap up, and it's not even a quarterly reading wrap up. It's just all the books that I've read recently. At this point in the year, I have completed 10 books and I have DNFed one book. I did already make a video where I thoroughly review the first two books that I read this year, so Blood Over Brighthaven and The Lost Story. If you are interested in my thoughts on either of those, I will link that video down below for you to check out. But that leaves me with 9 books to talk to you about in today's video. I'm gonna start with the only book that I have DNFed this year, and I do have a lot to say about it, so buckle up. That book is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. A little backstory here, this book was never really on my radar to pick up. What happened was I had this patient that I was working with for an extended period of time, and she was a big reader, and so we always ended up talking about books in our sessions, which was super fun. And I at the time was raving about The Boys in the Boat to her, and she went home and she read it and she loved it, and she came back and told me that based off of my obsession with this book, she thought that I would like this book. And honestly, her recommendation makes a lot of sense to me because both of these are historical nonfiction books that read like novels, and they're both super beloved in the nonfiction space. Unfortunately, this just really didn't work for me, and it takes a lot for me to DNF a book. One, I just have a completionist mentality, but in this case, I also felt a sense of obligation to actually finish this book because she finished my recommendation to her. And even knowing that, I still couldn't push through. Like, that's how much I didn't like this book. So what is this book about? It's broken up into 2 storylines. In the first one, we're following the main architect behind the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. And those sections of the book focus on everything that went into planning and executing the fair from an architectural standpoint. In the second storyline, we're following a serial killer that lived in the general Chicago area at that time and was capitalizing on the transient nature of the fair and using its visitors as his prey. What is really connecting those 2 storylines together? Not much. I firmly believe that Erik Larson wanted to write a book about the Chicago World Fair, and to zhuzh it up a little, he threw in a serial killer plot line so that the book would sell. And it worked. Like, this is a very popular nonfiction book. I personally found it to be so overwritten. You know, in high school when you had a thesaurus on deck to kind of like fluff up your paper, that's what this read like to me. At one point, he literally replaces the word hug with the word entomb. And he's talking about a father hugging his daughter. The father hugged his daughter. The father embraced his daughter. The father entombed his daughter. I don't think so. I do not think so. You also wouldn't believe the number of times he mentions blue eyes in this story. Why? Because the 2 men that we're following, they have blue eyes. That's as far as the meaning goes. There is nothing more to it other than they share the same eye color. And Erik Larson really wants you to know that. He goes on so many tangents that just constantly interrupt the flow of the narrative. And he also fictionalizes a lot of elements to the story, which I don't know, like, this is supposed to be a fact-based account of what happened. It's not supposed to be what Larson imagined happening. So as you can tell, I did not vibe with this story at all. I really tried. I gave it my best shot. I got 30% of the way through, and all I could do was complain to my boyfriend about it. And so eventually I had to stop myself. I don't think Erik Larson's writing style is for me, which is such a shame because he really has written some books on some very interesting topics that maybe I would have been curious to pick up otherwise, but you know, you win some, you lose some. Now let's talk about some books that I actually finished. The first one that I have to talk about is This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. This is the second book in the Skyland series. I think the third one is coming out next month and I cannot wait. This series follows three best friends, three adult women. And when I say adult, I think that they are in their late 30s, early 40s, somewhere around there. And in each book, we get the love story of a different member of this trio. All of these books are dual POV, so we get the perspectives of both parties in the relationship, which always elevates a romance for me. And in this one, we're following Soledad, who has been in an unhealthy, unhappy marriage for 18 years with the father of her children. At the start of the book, we find out that this man has been pulling some shady shit, enough so that Soledad finally leaves him. And the rest of the book is just about the aftermath of her divorce. On the flip side, we have our main male character, Judah, who is a single dad. He's on super amicable terms with his ex-wife, and they have this really wonderful co-parenting situation going on. Their twin boys are autistic. And in the author's note at the very beginning of the book, Kennedy Ryan shares with us that her son is autistic and that she drew inspiration from her own life to create the characters in this book. And I loved that. I loved the representation and I loved reading about these boys. This book technically falls into the romance category, but I don't know if that's entirely accurate because it really showcases relationships of all kinds and love in all its forms. It's about Judah's relationship with his sons, his friendship with his ex-wife. It's about Soledad's relationship with her daughters and her sisters and her friends, and of course the main male character. But at the forefront of it all, it's really about her relationship with herself. I love this series because we're following characters who are in their 30s and 40s. They approach everything with experience to back up their decisions, and it's all so mature. It's such a pleasure to read. I ended up giving this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. I did have to knock it down half a star because there are some pretty cheesy moments, cheesy lines, specifically in Soledad's inner monologue that I could have done without. But aside from that, these books are genuinely so good and so distinct from other popular romance novels out there, so I definitely recommend. After that, I read The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop. I read a lot of memoirs, and I often read memoirs by people I have never heard about because their stories are really compelling and I appreciate the insights and perspectives that they have to share. This is a memoir that I don't think I would have enjoyed as much had I not known who Kelly Bishop is prior to reading it. I think there are two primary audiences for this book: fans of Gilmore Girls and people who are really interested or involved in dance, theater, show business, etc., etc. I am a Gilmore Girls super fan. It's my most watched TV show of all time. And even for me, this was good, but not great. For the most part, this read like a resume of her various dancing and acting gigs. She did weave a couple of personal stories in here and there, but she never went as far as she could have with those, or as far as I personally would have liked. And there's not too much more that I have to say about it. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. After that, I was still very much in the memoir mood, so I picked up Cockroaches by Scholastique Mukasonga. I talked about this pretty recently in a video where I go over my top 5 favorite memoirs of all time, and this made the cut. It is a first-hand account of the Rwandan genocide. This isn't the kind of book that you read to learn about history in a textbook factual sense. It's the kind that you read to feel the weight of it in your chest. The author doesn't write to educate readers. She wrote this to memorialize the lives that were stolen. This is a tribute. It's a love letter to her family, her friends, her neighbors, all of whom were killed in the genocide. It's the first book that has made me cry in years, simply because it's true. It's incredibly devastating, but also incredibly beautiful. And I said this in my other video, but this is the type of book that's just gonna stay with you for a really long time. And it is my mission to get as many people to read this as possible. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next 3 books are all featured in my most recent reading vlog, where I read books that won awards in 2024. First up was the Women's Prize for Fiction, Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan, a historical fiction book that takes place during the Sri Lankan Civil War. So this is written from the perspective of a young Tamil girl who has these big dreams of becoming a doctor one day. And in the backdrop, there is a lot of political turmoil going on that is impacting her and her family, specifically her brothers, who are getting pulled into the conflict in different ways. There's so much that happens in this book, I couldn't even begin to summarize it if I wanted to. One of the most striking accomplishments of this author's writing is the way that she was able to capture the nuances and complexities of war in a way that I've never read before. She really highlights the sins of both sides involved in this conflict, and through that poses a lot of ethical questions that don't have simple, straightforward answers. I found it to be really, really thought-provoking. What I loved about this book, and what I love about historical fiction in general, is that it provided me with the personal connection to a time and a place that would have otherwise remained distant to me. It compelled me to care, so much so that I did my own independent research on the topic because I wanted to educate myself and I wanted to learn about it. And I now find myself so utterly fascinated by a piece of history that I previously knew nothing about. I did give this 4 out of 5 stars, and it's a little bit hard for me to articulate why this wasn't a 5 out of 5 for me. I think that there were moments in the latter half where it started to read a little bit like a textbook, where I was just getting a recounting of events. I also found it to be a little unbelievable how our main protagonist happened to be present for all of these pivotal historical events. It kind of pulled me out of the story and reminded me that I was reading a constructed narrative. Funnily enough, it was the quieter, more intimate moments of Sashi's daily life in the gradual unraveling of her family's sense of normalcy that impacted me the most. It was those understated moments rather than the explosive, violent ones that hit me the hardest. Just seeing the way that war rippled into the most ordinary aspects of people's lives. Overall, a really good book and a super solid historical fiction. The next book that I read was the Goodreads Choice Award winner for fiction, The Wedding People by Alison Espach. Okay, so this is a book that I enjoyed as much as I disliked. So for every item in my pro column, I had an item in my con column to match it, which was a very interesting reading experience for me. The story centers around a woman named Phoebe who is having a really rough go of things and decides that she no longer wants to live. She checks herself into this luxurious hotel with the intent to end her life there. But instead, she gets swept up into the chaos of this wedding that is happening at the same hotel she's staying at. And her plans just kind of fall to the wayside. What I liked, Alison Espach's writing style is right up my alley. She's one of those writers that can say things so simply, but it'll just like hit you in the chest with how profound it is and how relatable it is. I also thought the dialogue was pretty well done. There was some good banter thrown in there that made me chuckle most of the time. Most of the time it made me chuckle. What I didn't like was the levity with which suicide was treated. I personally did not buy Phoebe's quick turnaround over the course of a single week. I worry what message it sends to readers who seriously struggle with mental health in that way, because you don't just snap out of a deep depression like that, you know? A book that I think explores the same concept in a much stronger way is A Man Called Uva by Frederick Bachman. That book, in my opinion, rings much truer to life, and I would recommend it over The Wedding People. So yeah, I get why this resonates with so many people, but it was kind of a mixed bag for me. The last book I read for my award winners reading vlog is the winner of the National Book Award, James by Percival Everett. I'll go ahead and tell you that I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I think that it was wonderfully done. This is marketed as a reimagining of Huckleberry Finn, but I think it's more accurate to call it a counterpart or a companion to Huckleberry Finn, because you get the other half of the original story. I didn't read Huckleberry Finn before I picked James up, and I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. In my opinion, James stands on its own. I can't speak to whether reading Huckleberry Finn first would enhance the reading experience of James, but I don't think that it's a requirement. In James, we are reading from the perspective of a slave named Jim who finds out that he's about to be sold away from his wife and his daughter. So he escapes the plantation on his own, and along the way he runs into teenage Huckleberry Finn, who is also running away from his own family problems and home life. Together, they raft down the Mississippi River and they face a series of wild, dangerous encounters. This story is so full of adventures and plot twists, and it's really fun to read, but it's also very enlightening. Everett does such a fantastic job of dispelling so many myths in this book about slavery. For example, Jim and the other slaves are constantly code switching throughout the book. So they will speak in this like broken dialect and act in a very submissive manner around white people. And then when they're in private, you see them speak in a very articulate, thoughtful way. And through this, Everett is making it very clear that they were performing as a way of protecting themselves. And he completely upends the assumption that slaves were simple-minded or unintelligent. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's just a glimpse of what you will find in this book. I think it was so fantastic. If you are even mildly interested in picking this up, you should definitely go ahead and do that. Next, I picked up the most recent installment in the Hunger Games series, Hey Mitch's story, Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I reread the entire Hunger Games series a couple of years ago, including A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I was one of the few people that actually enjoyed that prequel. It wasn't a favorite by any means, but I did think it was really interesting to get Snow's origin story. And this book, this prequel, just like took it to the next level. It was everything that I hoped it would be. Now listen, a lot of people are calling this book fan service. And yes, there are a lot of character appearances from people in the original trilogy that are naturally going to appease fans, but they're all there for a reason. What I consider to be pure fan service is when an author returns to a familiar world without adding anything new or meaningful to the conversation. That is not what Suzanne Collins is doing here. The callbacks that she includes are super intentional. They're not just meant to induce nostalgia in the readers. Those moments and those characters are meant to illuminate a much bigger picture and connect all the dots in a very purposeful way. And I just think to dismiss Sunrise on the Reaping as fan service is doing it a disservice. This book recontextualizes everything that we read in the original trilogy, and it enriches it. I don't know how Suzanne Collins did it, but this book just like perfectly slots in to the rest of the series like a puzzle piece. I really loved what she had to say with this story. Without spoiling anything, there are themes of propaganda and the power of storytelling. The book also goes into rebellion as a long-standing collective effort, not something that is sparked overnight by one heroic figure. And I really, really liked that. Reading a book where you know how it ends and you know what's in store is a different kind of devastation. It all makes sense why Haymitch is the way that he is. That man has been through it, and I love him now more than ever. My super, super minor gripe with this book is that Lenore Dove felt like an iteration of Lucy Gray from A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And because of that, it was a little challenging for me to feel the connection between her and Haymitch, which kind of was an integral part of the story. But other than that, this was essentially a perfect book in my eyes, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. After that, I needed a little bit of a pick-me-up, so I read Funny You Should Ask by Elissa Sussman. This is your typical rom-com. You know, it's average, but it's enjoyable. It's light, it's easy to get through. It has that addictive quality that keeps you flipping the pages even though you're kind of rolling your eyes along the way. And I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The story follows our main character, Chani, who is a writer, and she's been assigned to do a piece on the newest James Bond actor, Gabe, who is of course her biggest celebrity crush. They meet up for an interview, and what is supposed to be just one single lunch turns into a whirlwind weekend of adventures together. 10 years later, she gets hired to do another profile on him. And so we jump back and forth in timelines to uncover what happened all those years ago and see where they stand with each other now in present day. One of the reasons that I love second chance romances is that there's always an air of mystery around what originally went wrong between the couple. And this book definitely had that. It kept me turning the pages. I wanted to know what happened on that first weekend together. And then I was left really disappointed when I found out that it amounted to pretty much nothing. Also, in classic rom-com fashion, the relationship in here is just completely unrealistic. Even though this book takes place over a decade, our main characters spend a total of less than a week together. And they're supposed to be like madly in love with each other. So it's very insta-lovey, which is not my favorite. Another thing, at the beginning of the book, when Chani meets Gabe, she is so fixated on him being shirtless. She talks about it over and over and over again. And if the roles had been reversed, that just wouldn't fly. But you know, for all my criticisms, I was still fairly entertained. I would say that if you're looking for a fun, fluffy time, go for it, but don't expect anything too deep or surprising in here. And I did it. I did my first reading wrap up of the year. I don't know how I'm gonna structure these moving forward. I waited this long because I've been reading more slowly than I normally do, and I don't really know if I'm gonna pick up the pace or not, and I definitely don't wanna pressure myself to do that. So I'm sorry that I can't give you any sort of consistency with these types of videos. Maybe I'll start doing monthly reading wrap-ups again. Maybe I'll just do a reading wrap-up every 10 books that I read. I'm not really sure. Anyway, let me know what you've been reading. What's a favorite book that you've read recently? Tell me if you have any thoughts about the books that I've mentioned in this video. Of course, I love having a dialogue about it in the comments. And yeah, in the meantime, I hope that you're all doing wonderful, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.